Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about divs and spans, which are both HTML elements or tags, as well as ID and class attributes, which are used for semantics. They're used to kind of separate content. They're also used for CSS styling, which we're going to talk about in the next section. So let's create a new file called 09 underscore, and we'll just call it ID underscore class.html. And we're going to put our structure, our boilerplate in here. And for our title, we'll say div span ID and class. So we've used divs before. We used it to separate our our labels and inputs in the form, and where we talked about forms. So let's put a div in here, and let's say that this is going to be the header of our website. We have maybe an H1, say my website, or maybe you have an image, a logo image. And then we'll put a paragraph that says like some kind of slogan. We'll just say a site about me. Now, since everything in this div pertains to the header, I'm going to give this an ID of header. Okay, or maybe even main header, because you could have multiple headers. Maybe you have you have articles on the page and you have headers for the articles. So let's call this the main header. All right, and then underneath that, let's create a UL. And let's give it some LIs, some list items, and we'll put some links inside here. And let's say this is the home page link. I'm going to copy this down twice. We'll say this is the about link. Goes to the about page. This goes to, let's say, contact. So this is a navigation menu. So let's give this UL an ID of, let's call it main nav. You can call it whatever you want. Now let's say underneath the navigation we have an area that has some information about us or about our page or whatever it may be. So we'll have a div, and let's give it an ID of about. Now here I'm going to show you a very, very helpful Emmet trick. Okay, so again, Emmet is installed with VSCode, and it allows us to do things faster. So instead of typing out ID equals, what we can do is we can say div, and we can put just a number sign which represents an ID, the word about, and then tab or enter, and it puts it in for us. And then to take it a step further, if it's a div, like we could do this with an H1, we could give it an ID of about like that. But if it's a div, we don't even have to write the word div. We can simply just put a number sign and then about, and then hit tab or enter, and it will give us a div with the ID of about. Okay, so nice little tip there. And again, you don't have to use it, but it will make you write your HTML much faster. So let's say in this about we have an H3, which is a heading. We'll say about, and then maybe a paragraph with some text. We'll just generate some dummy text here. Okay, and then maybe under that div we have, let's say, an area for contact info. Okay, and I know I haven't talked about spans or classes yet. I'll get to that in a minute. So let's create a div with the ID of contact. And in here, maybe we have another heading. Remember, it's good practice to not have more than one H1. I don't think, well, yeah, we do have an H1, which is in the header. So every div here is using an H3 as a title. You could use an H2, and again, you could use an H1. It's just good practice to just have one on the page. So let's put a UL here. We'll do some list items. We'll put like address, 50 Main Street, Boston, Mass. Let's put another list item with a phone. And let's do another list item with an email. We'll just say me at, I don't know, somethingcool.com. Okay, and then finally maybe we have a footer, so we'll have a div here with actually we can just do ID footer. And we'll have a paragraph, and let's just say copyright 20, we'll do 2019 because it's the very end of 2018 right now. Alright, so let's save this and take a look. We'll open it with Live Server. It's going to look very ugly because we have no CSS, but it's structured in a very common way. So we have a header, we have the navigation, we have some different sections about, contact, and then we have a footer at the bottom. And we used IDs for all of these. Now, when it comes to CSS, we can grab onto these IDs and we can style these sections by their ID, but we also have something called classes. Now, a lot of people get confused on when do I use an ID and when do I use a class, and the reason for that is there's no functional difference. Like, they don't behave any differently. You can style them the same exact way, but it's good practice to always have your IDs be individual, meaning you're not going to have a main header ID anywhere else. Like, you're not going to go down here and have a main header ID. You're not going to have another section on the page that has an ID of about. So basically just one per ID. Now, a class you can repeat. So let's say we wanted to style like a border and a light gray background around the about and the contact area. We might have a class called card. Actually, I'm going to add a CSS style up here, and don't worry if you don't know what any of this is. I'm going to do this later. I'm going to show you this later, but I'm just going to put a style that grabs onto the card class, and we're going to add a class of card to both of the divs of about and contact. So, oops, did that backwards. We want to do class equals card, and then let's go down to the contact div right here and also give that a class of card, and let's save. And now notice they both have the same styling, so you can see the difference here. IDs, they're individual to that section, but classes you can repeat. So we can have as many cards as we want. If I wanted the header to have that same style, excuse me, I could give that a class of card as well, and it would get that styling. Okay, so that's the biggest difference between IDs and classes. Now, some people, I mean, everyone's different. Some people don't even use IDs. They'll just use classes. Like, instead of doing this, you might see something like this, like class, main, header, and card, both in you know, both classes. But I think that this is a better way to structure it. Okay, but you'll come to find your own way of doing things. But generally, the most important thing is not to repeat IDs on the same page, at least. All right, so next let's talk about divs and spans. We've used quite a bit of divs here to separate out our content, and the main difference between a div and a span is a div is a block level element. It pushes the next thing down. So let's say I had a style for, let's do a class called enhance, and let's say we want the color to be yellow, and we want the background color to be black. And this is CSS. I'm gonna go over this all in the next section. And let's say we wanted to add it to a piece of text in this paragraph. So if we use a div, if we say div class equals enhance, and let's wrap this div, let's put it like right here, and let's save it, we get that styling, but it knocks it on to the next line. It basically goes in between, you know, this line and this line. This is a case where we want to use a span because a span is an inline element. So let's grab this. I'll highlight this div and do Control D to grab the next one and just change them both to a span. Okay, save it, and now notice that it's not block level. It just stays in its place, and we can still add that styling. So that's the difference between a span and a div. For the most part, you're going to be using divs, but when you need it to be inline, you want to use a span. Now, HTML5, when it was released, it came out with something called semantic tags to better lay out our sections. So for instance, there's a header tag which we could use instead of having to use an ID. We could use the actual header tag. There's something called a nav tag we could use for navigation. There's section tags for stuff like this, and we're going to go over that soon. But in the next video, I want to just quickly cover entities, okay, which are little symbols we can use in HTML. For instance, this copyright down here, if we want to put a copyright symbol, we can do ampersand copy semicolon, and if I go ahead and save that And now you'll see down here it actually gives us a little copyright symbol. So I want to talk a little bit about that in the next section before we move on to HTML5 semantic tags.
Living life, every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days. Fuck me, I'm looking in the mirror, so foggy, but I've never seen clearer. every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days. Fuck me, I'm looking in the mirror, so foggy, but I've never seen clearer.